You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Happy Wednesday, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to my program, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. To come on over and check out all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio and all the different places you can find this program being broadcast on the different networks. You can also come over to my YouTube stream and watch the live chat room and catch this in a simulcast video at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And there's a couple of treats tonight. The first one is I want to say happy birthday. It is my wife Rainy's 40th birthday, and she looks as amazing as she did when I met her 15 years ago. And so I want to wish her the best happy birthday. It's been a good day and a good night yet to come. And so happy birthday, sweetie. And also, those of you who are listening tonight, I've got something that's special for those who are watching the stream in video. I'm going to do a little bit of a slideshow, but don't feel left out. If you're just hearing this audibly, I'm going to give you some description of what we're doing. But in relation to this series we've been doing on the Exodus and the Conquest, I've got some pictures of the last couple of times where I was at Serabit el Khadim, and we're going to look at those photos here in just a couple of minutes. If you want to come over now to the YouTube channel, you can listen to the show broadcasting as well as join the YouTube stream and watch the photos and watch the chat room as it goes. You can listen and watch at the same time. And so, welcome tonight to this show. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. The first half of the show, we're going to cover the slides that I've got here. And many of you have seen a couple of things that I've shown. I've shown some maps of the area of things that we're talking about. But I wanted to give you an idea of what the area looks like. Now, this isn't exactly in relation to the conquest of Canaan, which we've been talking about, but I mentioned that the Exodus took a route through the Bitter Lakes, which was mistranslated. It's the Sea of Reeds, up to the north of the Red Sea. This is where I believe the Red Sea crossing took place. And then they turned south along the eastern shore of the Red Sea and traveled about 40, 50 miles south, and then they went inland to Serabit el Khadim. Now, it's not mentioned in the Bible story by name, and I think this is because by the time even of the time that they were writing in these books, let me back that up. I jumbled that sentence. Remember, Moses wrote the books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And then in that we have the story of the Exodus, the conquest, coming to the Mount Sinai. But by the time you are into Israel's occupation and establishing the state of Israel, and then after the Babylonian captivity, when they went and rewrote the scriptures, they went to the Library of Alexandria, 72 rabbis to rewrite the history in about the 400s BCE. And when they did this, by this time they've really forgotten where Mount Sinai was. Locating the place was very difficult for them. Now, this is a mountain that, Serabit el Khadim, is a mountain that was identified by Flinders Petrie, an archaeologist back over 100 years ago. And he believes that this was the mountain. And John Ward, my good friend who also co-authored the book with me on the Exodus, believes that this is the mountain that is the mountain of God mentioned in the Old Testament. And it has many earmarks to the place that I think lead us to believe that this is a good place to conclude that this is where the mountain existed. Now, it's possible that there was more than one location for the mountain of God, but it has some pretty specific details that are given in the Bible. You also can look at and start triangulating by the places where Israel went after the Exodus, or the places they wandered, the amount of time that passed, a few weeks, a couple of weeks after the crossing of the Red Sea, and they're at the mountain. Now, in the Bible, it does mention this mountain, but not by name, is where they also had stopped to liberate the slaves who were working in the turquoise mines there. Turquoise and copper, I believe, is what was being mined all around this mountain. And as I mentioned, Serabit el Khadim, the patron Egyptian god of this mountain, or goddess, was Hathor, the calf goddess of Egypt. And she was the patron goddess to the miners, and also this was her mountain. And I believe that's why you have the Israelites building a golden calf to honor Hathor, because they're encamped at the base of her mountain. And you've also got Moses, who is up in the mountaintop, gone for like 40 days up there, and he's getting the tablets of the law and so on, the stone stelae of tablets on which it says, the Bible story says, God wrote the 10 Commandments with this finger. And so I'm going to start showing you some of these slides, some of these pictures, and I want you to get a good feel for the place. The first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to show you a map. Let me click that on. Now, this is very similar to the map I was showing you the other day. As a matter of fact, you see the Sinai here. That's that V-shaped, it's not really a peninsula, but you've got the Mediterranean on the north, and you've got the Red Sea to the south with the two branches coming up of the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aqaba. And you can see I have marked here where Serabit el Khadim is on the map. It's in this mountainous region in the Sinai. Now, the traditional site is just a little bit to the south and east of that, and you see St. Catherine's. That's where the monastery, they built the monastery there. I believe it was at least 1,500 years ago that they built this monastery. But that's the traditional site. You've seen pictures of it. You've seen, even in the movies, they pattern the mountains in their backdrops as the mountain that you see at St. Catherine's. But I believe that that's the wrong location. I believe Serabit el Khadim is where they went. And you can see here, if you look back up toward the north center of the map, you see the Wadi Tumalat again. This is where they left Egypt from Goshen or Pi-Ramses, and they crossed through the trade route, and they came to the Bitter Lakes, the Sea of Reeds. And this is where I believe you had this Red Sea crossing. And so what I want you to see here is that the route they took then, once they crossed the Bitter Lakes, they ran right down the shore into the shore of the north tip of the Red Sea and followed that down. There's a highway there now, and we drove down that highway, and it's desolate. It's a paved highway now, and there's a few little towns, and by little towns I mean little. You're looking like 12 buildings or something like that. But you go down that highway, and you get down to, I can't remember the name of the city, and I didn't put it on the map, almost straight west of Serabit el Khadim there. And that is where we met up with Sheikh Barakat, who is the sheikh of the territory where Serabit el Khadim is. And so let me start going through some of this with you. Here is the next picture. This is, there's John Ward and me in the back of the Sheikh's little Nissan pickup truck. And this is just as we're entering the Sinai, coming in from the coast, going straight west towards Serabit el Khadim, which is way out there in the background. You see all the mountain region. This was the wilderness of Sinai, the Sinai wilderness mentioned in the Bible where the Israelites wandered for about 40 years before they went in and began the conquest in the land of Canaan. And so Sinai, I'm going to start showing you some pictures of what we did. And let's see, what is this? That is nothing. So let's move on to the next one. There is John Ward and I with Sheikh Barakat. And this is, again, he is the sheikh of that territory. And he's got a small village there below the slopes of Serabit el Khadim. And he was a very gracious host to us. And he put us up in their Bedouin tents overnight. And we climbed the mountain the next day. This was back in 2013. I believe this picture was 2014. The next year, we took a group of people with us to Serabit el Khadim on a trip that we took, kind of retracing our steps. And this is the Sheikh's compound now at Serabit el Khadim. Now, you don't actually see the mountain in this picture, but you get an idea of the terrain. It's rough, it's sandy. The big sandy expanse right down the middle of the picture, going from left to right, that's what's known as a wadi. That wraps around the whole mountain range, and that wadi can fill up with water sometimes, but it's a trade route, and it's an open expanse of sand. And you see down below, this is the compound at Serabit el Khadim, kind of central to the photo here. You see the little buildings, and you see our buses that we took in there. This is the Sheikh's compound, but their little village is off. You can see it in the background a little bit, up the road there. That's their village, and it's also directly across from the wadi here as you go off to the right. And so this is the place where we all ended up, and this is where Sheikh Barakat, when John Ward and I went the first year, he had a tent pitched. Let me show you that picture again. He had a tent pitched right near that round building you see there, and there's a walled compound there. He had their old Bedouin tent pitched inside there. And then the next year we were there, he also pitched the same tent, which he told us at that time was about a 120-year-old tent that belonged to his family. And that's where he put up John and I, and we also had dinner there the first night. And then the sheikh also prepared us dinner. I wonder if is that the next slide? No, there's the sheikh and John and I again. And that's down in the compound there. And I don't know if I've got Barakat. No, that's not it. I had a picture of him preparing us dinner, and maybe I inadvertently did not include it in this batch of slides. But there's Sheikh Salim Barakat and John Ward and I in his compound. And right behind us, in the background there, you see the mountains that right behind that is Serabit el Khadim. You did not get a really clear shot of this from where we were standing in this photo. But there's the good sheikh himself. And if I go back to the compound here again, when you see this sandy wadi that's going in front of the compound and wrapping around, this is the place where I believe the Israelites encamped all along that sand wadi that wrapped around there to the other side and the mountain. And you can imagine if there were anywhere from 100,000 to some estimates, which I think is kind of an inaccurate numbering system, they said up to 6 million Israelites. I don't think there were 6 million of them, but they do talk about there being 100,000 men and their wives and their families, their children, their livestock, and all of that. So you could have had quite a huge number of people there. So there's the sheikh. And then this is John and I climbed up on the ridge opposite Serabit el Khadim. And so we're up high above the compound here, and you can see the wadi down on the lower right there, and extends behind us all the way up into the left, the sandy wadi. You can see the trees down almost left of center. You see trees down there, gives you a little bit of a perspective of the size down there. But behind us is the range of low mountains that Serabit el Khadim is behind that first range right there. And so we climbed up that mountain the next morning from this picture. And here you go. Here is the tent in the Sheikh's compound. This is the old tent that he put John and I up in. And the night before we climbed the mountain, we had Mustafa Rezik, who I do not have his photo here. He is the Egyptian guardian of this site, if you will. He was the appointed as the man who, he was the archaeologist and the historian, appointed by the Ministry of Antiquities to do all his work there. He was the guardian of this site. And he's the one, we sat in that tent the night before with a fire going and ate a meal. And we pulled out our laptops. And he asked me, he says, so why do you want to see Serabit el Khadim? And I told him that, and John was there as well, we told him that we're writing this book. And we wanted to see this place because we believe this was the mountain of God mentioned in the book of Exodus. And he said, I told him my theory, that I believe this guy back here, Senenmut, the bust behind me, who I believed he was the Grand Vizier to Hatshepsut, the female queen of Egypt in the 18th dynasty, and that he eventually became Moses. And Mustafa leaned into me over the fire, and he says, I have a surprise for you at the top of the mountain. And because up at the top of the mountain is a couple of temples, and they were not much to look at. They were caves, and but successive pharaohs for 1,500 years built little chambers out from this cave, and it's all in ruins right now, but you can see each one of the pharaohs for quite a number of years there that had built a chamber that now, I would say, think about the size of a single car garage, and you get the idea of the sizes of these chambers. And there's no roof on them anymore, and they're all open air now. But I've got a couple of pictures of those things. So if we go in here, let's get back to where we were. There's John and I again. There's the tent. Now, moving on. Oh, this is a photo. I threw that in there. The next year, we went back and we took 13 people with us to recap this trip that we had taken the year before, studying and researching for the book. These are my twin daughters, Abby on the left, Bryn in the middle, and that's John Ward's daughter, Bryony. And they came along with us, and this was on the climb up on the opposite side of the wadi from Serabit el Khadim. So I wanted to throw that in there. There's my own kids and John's kid as we were there at Serabit el Khadim. Now, once we got to the top on the opposite side, I shot this photo looking towards Serabit el Khadim. Now, you see those twin peaks in the background. That's just a prominent landmark that you'll see a couple of other times in these shots. But Serabit is just behind this mountain you see in the foreground with the little peak just before you see, next to the twin peaks in the background. Serabit is wrapped around on the other side of that, and it's a plateau on top of that where these temples are. And so this is a shot looking down at the wadi that wraps all the way around to the left and around to the other side of Serabit. And this is where we believe the Israelites camped, was down in this area toward the base of the mountain. And there's another shot of it, I think. Yeah, here with a little less. This first shot here, little gloomy looking. We had some clouds coming over, and you see the dust in the air. This shot, I just brightened it up a little bit with my lens, and so you can see the range in which Serabit el Khadim sits. And I mean, what a beautiful location. And there's nothing there. It's quiet. It's not touristy. When we went and signed the Sheikh's guest book, the first time we were there were about a dozen people over 6 years that had signed this book when they visited his site. And that's how desolate and out of the way this is. And you saw by the map how far away from civilization you are here. You're in the middle of God-forsaken Sinai wilderness. Now, this is as we started climbing up the mountain, there is an old processional path that you can follow. Because of the temples there was a caste of priests that lived there, and they did work there. There was a processional way where when the pharaoh visited or the grand vizier visited, or priests and officials, there was a path that you could follow going up this mountain. And you can partially see the path if you look very closely in this picture, down in the foreground toward the center. You see a little dirt path that kind of winds off toward the edge there, and then it picks up again and it's going down. That's the path that they followed. And all along this route as you're climbing, there are hieroglyphics on the walls and pictures carved in. Now, by the way, this is Sheikh Barakat again. He, with his own hands, he sat down and he made us dinner that night. And this is him. He's got that very elfish grin about him, but he's sitting down and he's making us dinner that night, the night before we climbed up the mountain. So that's the Sheikh. Now, this is me, of course, and this is on that climb up. Now, what they've done here, if you see way down in the lower left, you see there's a little square white sign down there. They put some signs in here. They built a stairway in some spots, and they put up this little wall. You see me leaning up against this very low wall that defines the path. They put in some steps in some places, but this picture, I included this to show you what this mountain looks like. Now, there weren't the paths that you have here, even though there was the processional way that went up the side of this mountain. They were not all stoneworked like you see here with these low, rough walls. It was a path, but this shows you the elevation we're getting to as we're climbing this mountain. And when I say we climbed a mountain in the Sinai, there was a lot of stairs. There was a lot of uphill. It wasn't like picks and axes and spikes and ropes. We didn't need any of that because over the 1,000 years and the last few centuries, they've really defined this path a little better. And in the last decade, a couple of decades, is when they put in this stairway. Which, by the way, when we went with the whole group, the stairway had been completely washed out down at the bottom because they had a mini flood, a wash coming off the mountain. Now this I threw in here because it's the wadi at night. This is looking toward Serabit el Khadim from the Sheikh's compound, and that's the wadi you see. But this was about midnight. You see the stars in the sky, and this is by the light of the full moon. We were there at Serabit el Khadim, Jean Ward and I, on the night of the full moon, which gave it another mystical quality. We stood right here, and there was a slight breeze, and I said to John, I said, just close your eyes. You can imagine the Israelites camped here, all the fires, all the sheep and the goats lowing, the sound of people singing, perhaps, talking. This was the spot. And now this is as we proceeded up the side of the mountain. You can see there our guides, John's man Friday there on the right center. And then some of the people, this was the second year we were there, that were coming up behind us, up the slope of the mountain. We had about 12 people went up the mountain with us. And so, folks, that's some of the pictures. We're already at the end of the first segment. We're going to pick these up when I come back. And if we have any time, we'll get into the material and the meat for today. If you're just listening audibly, I hope you're enjoying this. Even though you can't see the pictures, come on over and join us. Sit tight for 2 minutes. We'll be right back from the break, and we'll pick this up where we left off. right, gang, thanks for waiting through that break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're watching the Intrepid radio program, also listening to it over on Odyssey Radio. That's ODYSY1.com to find all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio. Tonight especially, you may want to come over while you're listening on audio. Come over to my YouTube channel. You can shut the sound off on the YouTube channel and just watch the presentation. Join the chat room with the live listeners over here and watch the little slideshow we have going on tonight that fits into some of what we've been talking about regarding the Exodus and the conquest. And you can find that over on my YouTube channel right now, youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And so come on over. And folks, I hope you're enjoying this. We're going to pick this up right now where I left off with showing some pictures from Serabit el Khadim, which is the mountain that I believe is the mountain of God mentioned in the book of Exodus. This, I believe, was Mount Sinai, and there are many earmarks that say that this was the place. Now, I'm going to throw in there one caveat. There's a percentage of a chance that we're wrong, that this was Mount Sinai. The Israelites definitely stopped here after the Exodus and picked up a lot of the other slaves who were working in the mines here. All around this mountain are all the mines. And you can go and you can see the mines. We even picked up little bits of turquoise that were on the ground, little tiny microscopic almost bits of turquoise. And so it's very possible there is another location. I don't think it's St. Catherine's down to the south, which we mentioned. And if I were to show you that map again here just to refresh our memories from the first segment, Serabit el Khadim, you see there, almost in the center of the map, lower center, and then St. Catherine's down below, but way over, and I haven't marked it, on the opposite side of the Gulf of Aqaba, there is a site that has been looked at that has lots of very strong earmarks of being the Mount Sinai of the Bible. It's filled with inscriptions of calves all over the place. The golden calf. It's got an altar there. It's got the big split rock where they said a spring once gushed forth out of that. There's even earmarks of water erosion there. That this was the rock Moses struck with the staff, and it split open, and a fountain came out to water the people. And there's all kinds of earmarks over there. I'd love to visit that site. But right now, the Saudi government, that's in Saudi territory across the Gulf of Aqaba. The Saudi territory is they've got it all fenced off. Barbed wired. Some have speculated because they don't want people really supporting the story of the Exodus having taken place there. That is also a strong possibility. So if Serabit el Khadim is just one of the places they stopped along the way post-Exodus and picked up the other slaves, and this is the mountain we're at, it could also very well be the mountain of God that's spoken of in the Old Testament. And I'll show you some reasons why I think that is. Let's get into some more of the pictures here. Now, this again was the mountain on the way up. There's the Sheikh. I've got to scroll through these a little bit. There's me. There's the wadi in the moonlight. And then, of course, the people coming up behind us, walking along this path. And if you look very closely, the stone's all the same color, so it's very camouflaged. You can see almost directly in the center of the picture, you can see that low wall that's maybe 2 feet tall that borders the path, the old processional path going up. If we move on to the next slide, this is just all of us sitting at the fire at the Sheikh's compound the night before going up the mountain. This was the second year I was there. That's me on the left, and John Ward is next to me. And then El Tayeb was our guide to some of the historic places in Egypt. He's become a very dear friend of ours, and he wanted to come along to Serabit el Khadim with us. And then on the far right, you've heard me mention him before, that's Chris Conway. Chris came with us on this particular trip. He was the psychic medium for a couple of seasons on the British show Most Haunted. After they lost Derek Acora, Chris, he's a Scottish medium, came onto the show, and he played the medium on that show. And he was a good friend of ours that came along on this trip and did a little psychic mediumship work while we were there. It's very interesting to have him along. And he had some very interesting stuff at Serabit el Khadim. Now, this is on the way up the mountain again the next morning. There's John and I, and of course you see the path. Well, you can't really see the path. We're on the path here. We wandered just a few feet off. We were looking at one of the mines that was still chiseled out of the wall there and looking at some of the chisel work that was done there. But the path stretches on behind us going back down the mountain. And you can see those twin peaks I talked about. Those are the twin peaks right behind us. So you can see where we are in relation to the Sheikh's compound would be around to the right and down the mountain that way. And so there's John and I. That's on the path up. And it's an interesting place. Again, filled with hieroglyphs, filled with wall carvings, rock art, all the way up this path, as well as the remnants of some of the mining here. But all the mountains around us were filled with mines. And you can see them behind us, some of those strataed mountains. There's big gaps and valleys in between where we're standing and the next mountain over. And that's where all of this was taking place, the mining back in ancient times. Now, of course, John and I, we had two different views on who was Moses historically. Now, it's only separated our two theories by about 80 years, same dynastic house. And so this is where we stopped along the way, and you can see we're looking at some of the hieroglyphs on the walls there. And if you look behind I'm on the right, you look behind me, you can see hieroglyphs all over the walls. You look behind John on the other side, you see hieroglyphs all over the walls. Up a little high in the upper left-hand corner, I want you to see something. You see that crescent-shaped carving in the wall? That is an Egyptian bark. And you've heard me talk about the bark shrine for the Ark of the Covenant. That's one of the boats right there. And they show this boat, a sacred boat, on the wall in the middle of the Sinai Desert, up on this wall on this processional path. And of course we're looking here and we're having fun arguing over a couple of hieroglyphs that are there on the wall. And, that kept going on for a little bit. And this was, so we had a lot of fun with that. And so this is on the processional way up the side of Serabit el Khadim. And again, if you look way over on the upper left, just to the left of that boat carving, you see a whole, what would you call this? It's not a page, a whole wall filled with hieroglyphs. And this is all the way up the side of this mountain. And so we had a good time arguing there. Once again, there's my daughters. I don't know how that picture got in there twice. Now, we're at the top of Serabit el Khadim here. And you can see, there's John Ward and I. And you can see way out in the distance the wadi below us, the stretch of the desert sand. This is where I believe the people were encamped during the Exodus, post-Exodus. And behind us, to the right center of this photo, you can see the temple compound up there. And it's not really like you think of Egyptian temples with all the glorious pillars and the facades and so on. This was a couple of caves. They had the cave of Ptah, the god Ptah, and the goddess Hathor. And you can see the walls there in the background. And this is where the chamber stretched out off to the left, hidden a bit obscured behind the hill there and behind John and I. And scattered all over this plateau top are ruins of obelisks, small stelae. And stelae, just think of what a stele is for a moment here. Think of how an old gravestone looks. Had the curved top, and it stood, maybe 2 or 3 feet tall. That's a stele, and it was only, a few inches thick. And these stelae are scattered all over this site. They range from a foot tall all the way up to 8 feet to 12 feet tall, some of these, with inscriptions all over them. Now, when you think for a moment of the Bible saying that Moses went up into the mountaintop and he brought down the stelae that were inscribed with the law, the Ten Commandments, this is exactly what you have all over this site. You have all these stelae, and they would carve messages in them. And this is one of the little hints that lets you know that perhaps Moses, when they visited this mountain, and he's up in the mountain for 40 days, and the people say, "Where is this guy, Moses? He's gone. Build us a golden calf to honor the calf goddess Hathor, whose mountain they're encamped at." But I think Moses was up there, and he met with the priests. Maybe some older priests that were there at the time he had been there when he was the Grand Vizier. And I believe he was up there and he went through the law with them, and I think that he inscribed the law of God on a couple of these stelae. And you would see spoil piles. Like if you look back here and you see these heaps, this black heap off to the right center, there's a lot of spoil in there. That's just throwaway stuff as they were chiseling these stelae. Here is a more close-up shot of this area, and you can see here, way in the back of this walled area, are the two caves. But spreading out toward the left and all the way up to the front gates, you see here, where the two men are standing there at the front gate. I believe Amenhotep VI was the last pharaoh who had built the chamber here. But you see these tall stelae that are markers there, and they're scattered throughout the ruins. And this photo really condenses the size of the ruins here and the length of them. But all these chambers fill in that whole area, from where that front gate area there all the way back to the caves of the gods. And now here's a shot as we go inside Serabit el Khadim. And you can see this is one of the chambers of the pharaohs as you're starting to go back in. And it looks like just a cluster of rock, which it kind of is, but you can walk back in time to successive pharaohs through each one of these little sections as you get all the way back to the caves. And you can see a wash basin in this one, right smack in the center of the picture, next to the tall stelae. And you see the crumbled walls all around this. They said it crumbled by an earthquake, but there are earmarks of this having been absolutely eradicated, torn down at one point. Stones just tipped off of each other, and all through this compound. And I've got more pictures as we progress through this compound. Now you see here a little different angle here. This is one of the front shrines, and off to the left there, you've got a little bit of a flat area, but it drops off down to the wadi. And this would have been a temple. You can see right in the center of the picture the round areas where there were tall columns. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 of them up the center of this picture. And those columns would have had a roof over them. And there would have been a higher wall on the right. And this would have been visible from the wadi down below. So there was this shrine that the priests built here. And there's hieroglyphs on the walls here, and of course all this stelae all over the place. And so this would have been like the greeting from the ground. You would see this shrine from down in the wadi. And you can see the state that the place is in. And so moving on, this is just another shot looking toward the caves, which are at the low point of that hill rising in the back. And over on the far right is all kinds of rubble that has not been excavated. And that rubble, we were looking into that rubble, we reached in and pulled out a shard of pottery. My daughters reached in when they were there, and in the sand they found a bit of turquoise. And so it's absolutely unexcavated, this site. And this is what they're working on. Mustafa Rezik, who I mentioned, that's his job. He is up there leading that excavation work. Now, this is the piece. Remember I told you Mustafa Rezik said to me in the Sheikh's tent the night before, he says, I have a surprise for you at the top of the mountain. And because I told him about Hatshepsut, how I believe that here, let me turn this picture off for a second and just talk to you. How Hatshepsut was the female pharaoh. She was co-regent with her stepson Tutmosis III, who was a young child. She sent him off to Mennefer, up to Memphis, to be raised. And she became the pharaoh. She was the co-regent for 6 years and then reigned as pharaoh for another 20 to 21 years. This is the time when she elevated this man over my shoulder here, this bust. She elevated Senenmut to power. And she was the co-regent with Tutmosis III. And that is what this picture right here is showing you. This is the top of a stele that was broken off. Now, there's an interesting thing about Hatshepsut, is that Tutmosis III eradicated some of her images from her temple when he finally came to power, right around 29 or 30 years old, after she passed away. And to establish that he was now the pharaoh, he eradicated some of her images. But 40 years later, his son, Amenhotep II, who I believe is the pharaoh of the Exodus, the man who encountered Moses at age 80, when he came back to liberate the people, that Amenhotep II eradicated all the rest of Hatshepsut's images. And also at the same time, 40 years after Senenmut had left Egypt, eradicates all the images of Senenmut. And the only ones, if you remember when we talked about this before, the only ones left are inside the doors to the Holy of Holies at Hatshepsut's temple that Senenmut built, because the doors would open inward and it would cover the walls. Down in the corners on each side is an inscription of him, his cartouche, and him declaring his love for the queen. And this stele here, because it's way out in the middle of the Sinai, was something that was originally missed. But it is broken here. It's a broken off top of probably what was about an 8-foot tall stele. And in this you see inscribed. You see Hatshepsut, you see Tutmosis III, and you see the two gods facing them, the god Osiris and the goddess Hathor. Now what's interesting here is you can see you've got Hatshepsut over here on the far right. Now they always depicted her as a man, as a pharaoh. She's holding the ankh in her hand. Just like Osiris, who is facing her. And you see her cartouche. If you see where her head is on the far right, just to the upper left of her head is her encircled cartouche of her name. That is Hatshepsut in hieroglyph. And just to the upper right of that circled cartouche, you see a little tall triangle. That was the symbol for king. This says that she is the king. Hatshepsut the king, or the pharaoh. And facing her is the god Osiris. Now on the other side, you see Hathor. You can tell it's her. She's the third image over from the right. She's the image you see on the left. And she's got the disc over her head and the horns, signifying that this is Hathor. Now, right next to her, she is facing a piece that has been slightly eroded away, but you can still see it when you see it in person and you shine light on it in the right way, the image of Tutmosis III. And his cartouche is also there. You can see the partially encircled cartouche that is next to his head. And you see it looks like a dot at the top of that circle. And then below it are the other elements, the scarab. And so on. This is he, and he is the king as well. And you see the little triangle is also carved off to the upper left of that. And it's a bit eroded away. So this was one of the few samples, and Mustafa Rezik took great pride and is smiling when he showed this to me. He said, this is the cartouche of, or the stele of the co-regency of Hatshepsut and Tutmosis III, which fit right into the timeline of course, the story that I was telling, with Senenmut being her grand vizier. And so it's a very interesting place. So there it is again, that's stele. And that's up at the top of Serabit el Khadim in the middle of godforsaken nowhere. Now this picture, this is kind of fun. I included this. We're outside the front gates of Serabit el Khadim here, or of the temple compound there. And if you see this, over to the right you've got the Bedouins, and their camels are off to the right of them. What John had them do for the people that we brought on our trip, he had them haul up this table and these chairs, and they cooked a meal for us, and they hauled up all this china. And this is china that John had made for us for our trip, the Exodus reality. And so it's inscribed. You can see one of the cups upside down there. It's inscribed Exodus on the cup for this bone china. And so this is the meal that we threw for everybody. That's John and I way in the back. John's Man's Friday off to the right of us. He was his servant, if you will, back home, but also an established businessman himself. And then these were all the people. You see my daughters are there in the back, and John's daughter in the red cap, and all the people who joined us on this trip. So we got, after climbing the mountain, Serabit el Khadim, we came to the top, and there we had this spread was all laid out for us, which was kind of a neat little thing that John did for the people on the trip. Now, this is a photo of how we went back down. We didn't take the processional way back down. We went to the opposite end of the mountain, and we took down the more rugged goat path, if you will, to get down to the wadi on the other side. And you can see in this picture, my twin daughters are right in the center at the bottom of the picture. They were pretty agile. We had a couple of people with us that weren't quite as nubile and limber. And you see John there and El Tayeb in the white shirt. And then Mo, our John's Man's Friday, and then Chris Conway. And we're coming down. You can see we're up in the mountain here, coming down these cliff paths. And a couple of people were a little nervous about the heights. And frankly, it wasn't a very safe thing to do, but it was an adventurous thing to do, and we did it. And so we got down to the bottom of the mountain from here, and we had our truck was waiting for us with the sheikh to pick us up. And this, I wanted to show you this. This is a memorial that I left at the top of Serabit el Khadim. And nobody goes up there. Nobody's going to go over and kick this over. It's sitting there, was on the edge of a cliff overlooking one of the valleys between the mountains there. And I set this up when I was there to commemorate my trip there and to commemorate my family. The bottom stone represents me, and then Rainey is the next stone. And then my son, my daughters, Abby and Bryn. And then Sam, my son, and then Flynn, who was the only one of my children alive at this point, my new children, and my younger children, Rowan and Ellery had not yet been born. So you've got this stack of stones there that's still there today on the top of what I believe is ancient Mount Sinai and the biblical Mount Sinai at Serabit el Khadim. And then... let's see, what have I got here? One last slide? I don't. I thought I had another slide in there, and I don't. So there you go, folks. There are the pictures that I put together, and I guess I wanted that to only take the first half of the show, and it took the whole show. We've only got a couple of minutes left. And tomorrow, we're going to hit again the Exodus and the Conquest, look at some historical data, some archaeological data, and I will just say here that these shows aren't particularly the place to discuss the timing of the Exodus relative to Egyptian history, but we're simply going to refer you to other information. I've done that already about this, and this is why Serabit el Khadim came up, because I wanted you to see this. And there is a lot of information that we're going to jump into that I don't even want to start now because we've only got about a minute and a half left of this show. But you've got here, there's a date of 1450 BCE, at the end of the reign of Thutmose III. You've got involving a setting in the co-regency of Thutmose with Hatshepsut, and that's about 1471 BC. And it's already been well represented in other things we've talked about here. So the dates that we have are all subject to variation, since more than one dating scheme is possible for Egypt's 18th dynasty. And I talked about how these overlapping chronologies of the kings, to which Hatshepsut and Thutmose III belonged. And there's other scenarios that are conceivable, but we're going to jump back into this in the dating system that seems to fit the best with the biblical story as it matches up to the historical accounts. And to me, this is incredibly interesting history. And of course, once you've been there, and you've put your feet in the sand, you've climbed the mountain, you've seen these places, you've had the visions. And then I've had visions when I was there. And I spent a whole show talking about one of those visions. And John, the same thing at the top of Serabit el Khadim. And there's one picture I showed you where I was holding a little branch, a twig, where you could see the temple behind John and I, and we're standing there in the foreground. That's the bush that we think may have even been the burning bush. And I talked about that once before, but some of the young guides that were taking us up were showing us the little white scrub bushes all over the terrain there. And he says, you know what this is? And they didn't know why we were there. And they didn't know we were there writing about a book of Moses. But he says, you know what this is? He says, this is a plant that's very valuable to the Bedouin. And he spoke this in very broken English. He says, because we bundle it up and you throw it in the fire and it will burn. It will burn without burning out for days. So it's a bush that that burns but does not get consumed. And they could cook with it and heat with it and things like that. And so that was the twig I was holding. And little did he know, we were writing about Moses. What about that burning bush? Was it this the bush that was there? Or was it an act of God? Something we may never know for sure. So thanks for being here tonight, folks. Thanks for letting me show you my stuff. Those of you who were only listening, you missed the visuals, but you can come over and see these anytime. Hope you got a chance to tune in. We will see you in 23 hours after this break, and you have a good night.